And we're live. What's up, guys? I'm Asani Fisher. Welcome to another episode of the SCS Podcast. At least I think that's what this is. I'll admit, I kind of have no clue what I want to do. One second, I want to do DFS video blogs. The next second, I want to do NBA podcasts. And all last week, I got swept away in the world of politics and went on this long political rant on Facebook and got carried away in that world. My ADD brain just jumps from topic to topic and project to project. Major kudos to the folks at Roto Grinders who've been totally cool with me taking the show in whatever direction I want. What I think we're going to do, I'm going to stick with the SCS podcast name and general theme, and insofar as having it up on YouTube and then doing the audio-only version on Roto Grinders. But what I think I'm going to do is maybe about 2/3 of the episodes are going to be what you've seen so far, where I have a guest on and lots of NBA-related discussion, and I kind of just pick their brain. And then maybe about one out of every three will just be like this one, where it's me by myself, and I'll have a lot of elements of the video blog type stuff that I used to do incorporated into this with, a general eye on the NBA as well. And then I'm going to do a lot of viewers' questions in these episodes as well. So let's jump into it. The major news of today, I'm recording this Friday morning, and I woke up today to hear the news about the DraftKings and FanDuel merger. I don't know much about this yet, so I kind of don't want to say too much. I'm like most folks, I'm just having this, let's sit back and wait and see attitude. I'm optimistic about it, I'm hoping it's for the best, but obviously we've seen, monopolies are never great because, you want the competition there. So yeah, cautiously optimistic, I guess, is the best way to put it in regards to that. For me personally, the big news this past week was that I took down a tournament. I took down the $444 DraftKings NBA contest with $150K to first. I believe it was this Tuesday, was it? I want to say. For those who have been following along with me this season, it's been a bit of a struggle. This football season, I've only had 2 winning weeks. So this win really came at a good time for me and helped, get my spirits back in the right direction. And it was a spectacular sweat. Without a doubt, a top 2 lifetime sweat for me. The other one being a heads-up match against Sahil I had a long time ago where I won on a stat correction. I talked about it in an old video blog. But anyway, this one, I had like 30 different teams in that $444 contest, and one of them was doing pretty well, but unfortunately it had ETwaun Moore on it, and ETwaun Moore ended up being an unexpected late scratch that day. Only like 2.5% of the field played him, so pretty much I thought that team was dead. There's no way you can win a tournament with a 0 on your team. So as I'm seeing this team, have every other player do super well, it's kind of like it's kind of one of the things you're happy but like pissed at the same time. It's like, oh, it's nice, this team's probably going to cash, but it's going to be super annoying when this team gets 15th place. And I realized that if ETwaun Moore would have just been healthy, I might have gotten first and get frustrated on that. So it's kind of this, I don't know how I'm feeling as the day goes along. And all of a sudden, this team's it's in first place. It was in second place for a long time. And then all my players, I had this sudden spurt and it's in first. And it's like, man, does this team actually have a chance with, getting a 0 from ETwaun Moore? I could maybe still win this thing. The last game of the night was the New Jersey Nets at Los Angeles Clippers. And I'm in first place now, and I'm just fading everyone. And it's looking like I'm going to get caught by like 10 or 20 people if the game keeps up. A lot of people were on Blake Griffin. A lot of people were on Chris Paul that night. Reddick and a few other value plays were viable as well. And like I said, 10 or 20 people were probably going to catch me, except for the fact that it was gearing up to be a blowout. The Los Angeles Clippers have just been destroying people this year. They'd be great DFS plays if they actually could play the fourth quarter, but they've been too good for their own good almost. Which, by the way, quickly to talk about that because that's one of the stories of the NBA season so far has undoubtedly been the Clippers. I think you might be able to say that, granted it's small sample size, only like 10 games into the season, But I think you might be able to say that they're in that second tier of teams now, below Golden State, of course, but alongside Cleveland and San Antonio. I think the Clippers might be there now. Granted, they didn't make a lot of roster changes, so the critic would look at them and say, why is this any different than teams from the past year? I think the pro-Clipper argument goes like this. One, it's maybe Bob Moute actually is, a great fit, and while he's not, he's not a player that typically moves the needle. That is, just what they needed was, a small forward who can defend, who can hit, open shots, and be a key role player. Maybe he is the perfect fit. Maybe he has found, gives them exactly what they need out of that role. And moreover, when you look at why they're winning, it's because their defense. They have the best defense in the league so far. And I think the pro-Clipper narrative would go that, defense takes time, and it takes, 2 to 3 years to really get all your pieces on the same page, especially when you're dealing with a mishmash of different leaders on the team and different, I guess the way to put it would be some high IQ players and some low IQ players. And I don't mean that in a demeaning sense, but I just mean it in the sense that, when you look at DeAndre Jordan defensively, in past years, he was oftentimes out of position. He would oftentimes go for pump fakes. He has great physical tools, but, they didn't always translate to his team being a great defensive team. And Chris Paul, on the opposite end of the spectrum, appears to be a guy constantly on top of things, constantly talking, great, leadership and great court awareness. And I think it might have just taken, 2 to 3 years for Chris Paul to learn how to effectively communicate to DeAndre, and DeAndre to learn how to, be listening to the advice Chris Paul's given. Like I said, it's a 10-game sample size, but if their defense is legitimately, top 3 in the league, then I would say, we can make the statement that these Clippers are for real. Anyway, sorry to go off on that tangent. I just thought that it was definitely worth mentioning because, like I said, that's one of my takeaways from the young season. It's definitely been the Clippers so far. Anyway, back to the story here. So the Clippers and the Nets are involved in this game that's gearing up to be a blowout, and so I'm sweating the third quarter. It's like a 30-point lead. I just need to make it to that. There's that break in the third quarter where most of the starters come out, and we hit that break. And I want to say I'm up 1.25 over second place. So I'm like, oh my God, I might have got there. The Redick, Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, they all got pulled out. The only thing is, a lot of people played Bojan Bogdanovic that day on the New Jersey Nets. And I have no clue what the Nets rotations are going to be like in blowouts. Obviously with guys on the Clippers, with Chris Pauls of the world, they're not going to play in a 30-point game. Well, with a guy like Bojan Bogdanovic, on one hand, he's a starter, and teams tend to rest their starters in blowouts. But on the other hand, he's Bojan Bogdanovic. He's not like a guy. If he gets hurt, it's not like the Nets, their world collapses or anything. He might be a guy they want to leave on the court in those situations to kind of find out, what he can provide them long term. And so my main sweat is Bojan Bogdanovic going to get back in the game or not? If he just stays out of the game, I win. I'm good. Unfortunately, they put Bojan back in. And so now I'm like, oh, man, it's early in the fourth quarter. He's probably going to play good, 6 to 8 minutes. I had a fade. I'm up 1.25 on DraftKings. So a rebound ties it. Anything else puts him over the edge. It's looking pretty bleak. Few possessions go by. I think a rebound goes off his hands out of bounds. He passes to a guy for an assist opportunity, but the guy misses the jump shot. Barely hanging on. And then I think Jamal Crawford just throws a pass right to Bojan Bogdanovic. It's such a gift steal. Gives him 2 points. Now he's up 0.75. I lose. And the thing about I was having a conversation on Skype with my friend Tony while I was doing the sweat. We were talking about how crazy the world of gambling is. As I'm sitting there, watching this play out, I realized that if I hold on and win by the narrowest of margins, this becomes such an epic story. The fact that ETwaun Moore got hurt and that I had a 0 in my lineup, it becomes a great thing because it becomes part of the narrative about how I won despite having the 0. But if I end up losing by 0.75, then ETwaun Moore becomes the entire reason I lost. And my entire emotional state and how I view the ETwaun Moore injury is so dependent upon whether I eke out a narrow victory or just barely lose. And it's such a ridiculous thing to go through from just like that's my day-to-day life thing. So anyway, I'm sitting there with, losing by 0.75 now. I was watching the game in my living room with my friend India, and I just leave. I'm like, I'm going to go outside, not even watch the game anymore. I'm down 0.75. I'm under 1% to win. It's not worth even watching. And I just had it up on my computer, and all of a sudden, my friend Aaron on Skype messaged me. He's like, oh, there's a turnover. How many do you need? And I was like, oh, I need 2, whatever. And I got the DraftKings scoreboard up in the other section of my computer screen, and all of a sudden I'm back in first. And I run back in here. I'm like, what just happened? Did Bojan turn it over twice? No way, that couldn't happen. And lo and behold, Bojan Bogdanovic, from the time where I left and stopped watching the game, he came down the court, made a turnover, went back on defense, didn't get any points, came down the court, made a turnover, went back on defense, didn't get any points on defense, and then got pulled from the game. Somehow the exact thing that I needed to happen happened. And so then now combined with the ETwaun Moore aspect of the story, just really made it an awesome sweat. And, when you win, it makes things a lot more enjoyable. I think the guy who got second was JAE, and then some numbers. I forget his name. I don't think I've ever met him at any of the live events, but he's a somewhat well-known pro. At least I see him around a lot of stuff. So empathize with him a bit for being on the losing end of that sweat. But overall, regardless of what side you were on, I think it was a pretty epic story. Anyway, moving on. The one other thing from a DFS perspective I wanted to bring up before I jumped into the viewers' questions. Today's Friday, and so this just happens to be on my mind, but major props to DraftKings for this $1,500 tournament they have on Fridays now. They, obviously you're taking a chance a bit when you have these guaranteed tournaments which could overlay. This is just a great tournament. It makes Friday so much more enjoyable to play now. Really looking forward to putting a bunch of teams in that. All right, let's move on to some viewers' questions. So this podcast is mostly an NBA podcast. It's not really a DFS podcast, but I realized very quickly when I opened it up to viewers' questions that a lot of people want to pick my brain about DFS and ask me DFS specific stuff. So this is what I'm going to do. I can't respond to I'm not going to tell you who I'm playing on DraftKings tonight. That's not, questions like that are just too crossing the line and so far as strategy talk. I'm not going to go there. Questions that have to do with general DFS themes I'm going to allow, but I'm going to kind of give half-assed answers in spots. I just don't want this to become a DFS show. And I'm really going to go into much greater detail on the NBA questions. So hopefully that will both appease the people who want me to hint at DFS, and I can answer their questions while still keeping with the general theme of the show I wanted to have here. All right, let's jump into it. Billy Cav says, really liked your NBA pod. Who is your fave NBA player? I think I actually tweeted back at you. The short answer to this question is Stephen Curry, but I wanted to answer. Twitter was not nearly enough. With 135 or whatever characters is not nearly enough detail for me to go into here. Steph Curry is the short answer, but I have a bunch of players I'm a huge fan of. I grew up a big fan of Jason Williams, White Chocolate, the point guard for the Sacramento Kings. My old PokerStars screen name actually was JWVDCW, which stands for Jason Williams, Lottie Divac, Chris Webber. I just loved his flair and his, no look around the back passes, the way he moved on the court. One of the more underrated or forgotten about plays in basketball history, his elbow pass. It was during the All-Star, I think it was like a rookie-sophomore game. This was the same year that Vince Carter had that amazing All-Star dunk competition. I remember this well because I remember I remember going to church the next day. I was a really religious kid growing up. And I remember going to church Sunday morning and talking to my friend Dan Harrison, who was also a big basketball fan, and telling him what Jason Williams did. And I can remember it was such an outlandish thing that he literally thought he did not believe me that actually happened. I told him, I was like, Jason Williams came down the court, had the ball in his right hand, went to throw an around the back pass to a guy on his left, and then elbowed it back, and the ball went to a guy on his right. And Dan just like literally didn't believe. He was like, no, that didn't actually, like, that's how absurd it is. The creative flair to pull that off in the game, which was just astounded me. It always bothered me that, like, that he wasn't actually a great NBA player, though. That a lot of the flair was showmanship that, resulted in turnovers, and it kind of hurt me a lot when the Kings got better, when they got rid of him and brought in Mike Bibby. Although it was cool to see that in his later career, Jason Williams actually did tune down the turnovers quite a bit. I think he led the league in assist-to-turnover ratio one year, which is pretty amazing considering the reputation he had in his early years. So anyway, I grew up a huge Jason Williams fan. I grew up in Maryland, so I was a Maryland Terps, Washington Wizards fan quite a bit. So I got on the Gilbert Arenas bandwagon for a while. And of course, Steve Blake and Juan Dixon, it was super cool to see them win a championship with the Terps and then go on to have, somewhat surprisingly productive NBA career, specifically or especially for Steve Blake being drafted as a second rounder. But Steph's the answer, man. In general, I'm a fan of, I don't get into like the emotional drama. Like, I'm not like, I don't like LeBron because he's a jerk. I like this player because he's really, like, I don't care about who these people are off the court. I'm more a huge fan of the athletic prowess that they demonstrate. And specifically, I like Steph, James Harden, Damian Lillard, guys where they come back next year with like more moves and moves you can tell. So like I was watching GIF on Twitter today. Someone posted of James Harden, a move he made against Jake Layman just the other night when Rockets versus Trailblazers. Someone sets a screen for Harden, and Layman has to fight over the screen in order to stick with Harden. And as he fights over the screen, he kind of just puts his arm out, like to just reaching in Harden's general direction, but not initiating any contact. And it's normally wouldn't be a foul at all. Harden very cleverly sees that this is putting Layman out of position, or sees that it's putting him in a position to take advantage of this. And he kind of hooks Layman's arm with his arm, but the foul gets called on Layman. I'm a fan of the creativity it must have taken for Harden to realize that the defender was putting himself in this position and then go to work on that move over and over to turn that creative impulse into an athletic movement. I think it's really cool. And so I'm not a huge, it's not that I'm not a huge fan. I can marvel at the Russell Westbrook, super athletic dunks where he jumps out of the gym. But because I could never do that, I can't just like go, practice jumping like Russell Westbrook. I just am not able to do that. But I was always able to take, a move I see like Steph or Dame or Harden do and be like, oh, I could actually go work on that. That's really clever how they, position them to hold the defender off like this and then just flip the ball up at the last second. Or I'm a huge fan of players where you can see that they work on their game in those little nuanced ways. That's what I appreciate out of basketball. That's what I love about the game. I go on YouTube and watch like highlight reels almost as much as I watch live games. I like marveling at the moves and the skill sets. All right, next question. We have Brian Boudreau says, would love to hear more about DFS lineup construction process. This is one of those questions that a bit crosses the line in terms of like how much I want to be talking about DFS and how much I want to be giving away. The reason I actually don't mind answering this though is because my answer to this is actually what I do is not what I would advise most people to do actually. I would call myself, so I'm borrowing from a poker term here. There's something we call a field player in poker. And what that means is there are the the correct way to ultimately solve poker and be great at it is to know the math behind each and every situation, to be like, no, I do this in this spot because of mathematical reasons. Well, before people got good enough at that aspect, it was possible to make a lot of money by just kind of having a general feel for how you want to play in every situation and not knowing the exact math behind it. Well, the way I construct my DFS lineups is akin to the way the field player executed in poker. That is, I basically just start off and I'm like, oh, wow, James Harden's a great play today. Let's pencil him in. And, oh, I want to play this guy. He's a great value play. And then through trial and error, I come up with a lineup and see, oh, I have $1,100 left over. I need to spend that somehow. Is there a way to spend it? Oh, here, I can do it. Ah, this looks pretty good. Let's go with that. I don't think that's I wouldn't recommend people follow that. I don't think that would work for a ton of people. I think I have friends and there are other people, and most of the other high stakes regs probably have a much more formulaic way about doing things. And yeah, I wouldn't advise doing things my way, and I won't go into detail about the way other people do things because I'm probably not at liberty to talk about their process and stuff like that. But yeah, so I basically just I'm a field player. I kind of just start putting together a team, got a bunch of guys I like, and hopefully it all fits together and I end up with, $0 left over on the sites. And if I have a little bit left over, I see where I can make, minor alterations here and there. Next question. Cullen Kanadi says, hey, for the SCS, how do you project minutes for players on back-to-backs? Do they generally play more minutes game 1 or 2? Thank you. Man, the answer, if there was ever a question where the answer is it depends, this is it. The difference between how Greg Popovich is going to treat a 38-year-old big man who's injury prone on a back-to-back versus how Tom Thibodeau is going to treat, a 25-year-old wing player in his athletic prime on a back-to-back, is vast. It's just completely different situations. You really have to know the specifics of each individual situation, and knowing something about previous years isn't always helpful. You might have known how Scott Brooks managed his point guard's minutes in the past, and you might have known how John Wall, how many minutes he played in back-to-backs in the past. But this year appears to be something different going on. John Wall seems to be getting rested much more than in past years. So apparently Scott Brooks has made some distinction or some decision that he's going to rest John Wall. And there's no real way to discern that other than just research, read what local team beat writers are saying, read interview quotes, and try to pinpoint the particulars of each and every individual situation. Next question. Man Gone says, hey Asani, enjoyed the preview podcast a lot. Still have to listen to the other two, but I would love to hear you discuss the idea of playing low-owned guys in cash games and whether you worry about ownership or not. Well, obviously I'm sure you do, but I am just curious, when constructing a cash lineup, how often you are willing to roll out a 5% or lower owned play. Again, a bit of a DFS question, but I'll just be very general. For cash games, when I'm constructing lineups, I do not at all worry about ownership percentage. However, I do look at ownership percentage when evaluating how I did. When looking back, if I happen to have a bunch of low-owned guys, I ask myself, oh, why was it that, the rest of the world didn't agree with me on this? And was I right or wrong? And I try to look for trends in that. If I see that I'm always playing Carmelo Anthony and when he's 5%, well, then maybe I have a certain bias towards Carmelo Anthony and I need to adjust for that. But yeah, I don't really look at ownership percentage ahead of time or going. I don't try to project. I'll never say, I think this guy's great for cash games. Oh no, but I think he's going to be low owned, so maybe I won't play him. No, that thought doesn't really cross my mind. In INUJV87 says, one of the things I would be most interested in, and I think would benefit the community the most in DFS, is film study on trending players and teams to see if there's things in the box score, to see that if there are things that the box scores are hiding or could be misleading. Example, New Orleans crazy rotation rotation so far or DeMar DeRozan's hot start to the season? This is a really interesting question. I'm assuming, so first of all, you say film study. Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding your question. I'm going to try to speculate on exactly what you're asking here, and hopefully I'm correct. Film study, I do not go back and rewatch games or study film, so I'm the wrong guy to ask about that. But what I think you actually mean is eye tests. You're saying, with things like DeMar, the surface level, it appears like, he's scoring a lot more points and shooting at a higher percentage than past years. Is there anything about the eye test that could tell us, is that something we should expect to continue? Or is that just, fluke variance? I would actually say, and this is a big part of my general approach to things, that if you've noticed something about basic stats, so like DeMar's points per game, it's very obvious to everyone. DeMar DeRozan's scoring more points, he's shooting the ball at a higher volume, and the Raptors are winning games. Those are, the surface level stats that we can all see, very readily and handily. What is the next step to take in our analysis of DeMar DeRozan? I don't think we should jump to eye test just yet. I would instead say, let's take a look at more in-depth advanced stats and see if we can glean something from those. So, for example, with DeMar DeRozan, I would want to look at the type of shots he's taking and see why exactly is he shooting at a higher rate this year? Is it because he's taking more layups and dunks? If so, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, players are going to make their layups and dunks at a more often than they make their jump shots. Or is he just taking the same old shots he's always been taking and just making them at a higher rate? Or are shots contested? Or are they not contested? Some sites like 82games.com or Nylon Calculus, have some really interesting stats on that. Stuff like, percentage, breaking down player shots into jump shots, close shots, layups, floaters, three-point shots, et cetera, and then further going into detail on, were they wide open, were they contested, were they heavily contested, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have an exact statistical analysis for DeMar DeRozan handy, but in general, when you take a look at DeMar's types of shots he's been taking so far this year, it's basically the same shots he's been taking in past years. He hasn't really, all of a sudden been getting a ton of open looks or a ton of, dunks and layups. He's pretty much just been making the same tough contested 2-point jump shots that he's been taking in past years. So this would lead me to believe that more than anything, it's just a bit of positive variance and that we shouldn't expect this to continue, throughout the entire year. I will say that one thing I've noticed, and I think this can tie a bit into your questions because it's something I've noticed eye test wise, or actually I should give a bit of credit to Aaron Jones because I think he was the first one to point this out to me, but I really do agree with him. For DeMar, there appears to be a bit of an inflection point. And this is a bit of an eye test thing, although you can look at data, how he does versus certain defenders. It seems to be that for DeMar, there's a bit of an inflection point whereby against 99% of the world, when DeMar DeRozan is being guarded by one of them, DeMar can get off that mid-range shot pretty much at ease. He just knows how to get in the lane, and it's not that it's completely uncontested always, but there's a difference between being contested and being scared that there's a chance you're going to have your shot blocked. I think that while DeMar, you might get a hand up in DeMar's face, I think DeMar knows you basically have no chance of blocking his shot against most of the world, against, like 99% of the defenders he faces. He just knows he can get into the lane, make that quick little, whether he has a litany of moves, so it's not just one move he goes to time and time again, but he knows he can do that little move and get his shot off. When he faces an elite defender, a Paul George, a LeBron James, a Kawhi Leonard, a Jimmy Butler, he loses this ability to get that shot off 100% of the time, knowing that you just can't block it. And I think there's a real inflection point for DeMar where his efficiency takes a nosedive when being guarded by the elite of the elite. I think he's a player who really benefits from playing against second units, playing against backup players. And so one thing that I think is sustainable for Demar, I think the fact that he is definitely just shooting hot so far this year, but one thing that is sustainable is that it appears that the coaching staff has discovered this, that you really want to have him in there against the second unit and just give him the ball and let everyone get out of his way. You can really buy Kyle Lowry some minutes on the bench when against second units, you just put Demar out there with, 4 guys who can't really do much and just let Demar shoot every time. Guys on the second unit can't guard DeMar DeRozan. They're just not. They're second unit players for a reason, and DeMar knows he can just shoot over them. So that's something I had learned from the eye test on DeMar, and that's something that. So I think you are going to see DeMar's regular season success continue in that regard. But once you hit the playoffs, once it's just, oh no, Paul George is going to stick to DeMar DeRozan, and for every single possession he's going to be locked into him, then I think you're going to see a big drop off from DeMar. At least I think so. He's a 27, 28-year-old who should be entering his athletic prime. It's possible he has made these improvements. I just don't think it's likely, and I want to be, proven wrong before admitting that. I think the other example or the other thing you brought up here in the question was the Pelicans' crazy rotations. I think this is just an example of a coach getting scared and clicking buttons. That's another poker term I'm throwing out there. Clicking buttons basically means, so like in the poker world, when sometimes you want to bluff in certain spots, you want to do this in certain spots, and then sometimes you play an opponent who just seems to be like, I'm going to bluff on this hand because I feel like bluffing on this hand, and I'm going to not bluff here because they're just clicking buttons. They're randomly deciding to do one thing one moment and the other thing at another moment. I think Pelicans coach Alvin Gentry is kind of just clicking buttons when it comes to his lineup rotations, and he's coming under a lot of fire for his team once again, underperforming so far this year. There are rumors that he might be getting fired, and he's stressed out and wants to try to find something to work, and so he's kind of just putting different combinations out there. I think he's kind of just he's not that good at this aspect of the game, and which is kind of I've been disappointed by Alvin Gentry's stint with the Pelicans, because I actually thought coming in that I thought he was one of the young, or not young necessarily, but I thought he was one of the coaches who really got it from in terms of he had a lot of awesome offensive success when he was with Phoenix, and I thought there were rumors that he was turning Anthony Davis into more of a three-point shooter. And, as an analytics dork, I'm a big fan of, whenever someone has 3-point range, you want to be teaching them to use that. But 2 years in, it really appears like Alvin Gentry, while maybe he really understands the emotional requirements of being an NBA coach, and maybe he really excels at some of those things, I don't think he really gets it from, rotations and roster moves perspective. Or it doesn't appear that he has any sort of cohesive strategy. Let me put it that way. That's what I mean when I say he's clicking buttons. When you look at someone like Brad Stevens or Popovich or Rick Carlisle or the really good coaches, it's very evident that they understand what they're doing. That, if they're not, they're either playing their best lineups, or they're doing something where you can give the benefit of the doubt to them as to why they're not. Maybe Popovich wants to rest players, or maybe, Stevens is executing some, end of the game situation, that requires not playing your overall best players, but rather the players, more suited to a specific skill set or something like that. With Alvin Gentry, he's just randomly, look at Terrence Jones, man. Guys like Terrence Jones and Frazier and Solomon Hill, they appear to be decent NBA players, and their minutes are kind of all over the place. And, I get the Drew Holiday situation kind of puts the team behind the 8 ball, but I'm just not a fan of a lot of – it seems like they don't know if they want Anthony Davis to be a 4 or a 5, and I think the way the NBA is going, you really want him to be a 5. And it just doesn't appear – just when you watch, granted, I hate that I'm not saying anything quantitative right now, but just when you watch the team, the ball doesn't move fluidly. It seems like, But one possession, it seems like Anthony Davis is barely touching the ball, and you're rolling your eyes at why is their best player not touching the ball? And then they have 5 possessions in a row where it seems like it's just give the ball to Anthony and everyone else, stands around. You don't see a lot of cohesion or team chemistry, and it's tough to pinpoint fault for that. But I think you have to look at the coach first and foremost. And you can also, maybe give Anthony Davis some blame there. I think I'm starting to definitely become I'm starting to buy into the argument that Karl Anthony Towns is without a doubt a better prospect than Anthony Towns, than Anthony Davis. And the reason I'm starting to think that is because Karl Anthony Towns appears to have super high basketball IQ. I don't know how to phrase it. He knows when. There are times where you just want your best player to take the ball and get out of his way and go get a basket for himself or go get a shot attempt for himself. And there are times where you need the ball to be moving and you need to. Towns seems to understand this game flow where it seems like Anthony Davis is kind of learning on the fly still, and because of that, I think it's even more important that he be coached up and have a cohesive system. So this is my long ramble. Is my way of basically answering your question by saying I don't think we can discern anything noteworthy from the Pelicans' rotations. I think it's kind of their coach just grasping at straws and trying to find something that works as he desperately, doesn't want to get fired, despite the fact that I think they're 2-10 or something like that right now. So yeah, that's kind of what you're seeing, and I don't think we can. I think. For a DFS wise, you kind of just got to deal with the fact you're going to see some random minutes allocations coming out of New Orleans, and that maybe with your cash games, avoid them a little bit outside of Anthony Davis, of course, who is a stud always. Anyway, I think that will do it for this episode. Hopefully I find a little bit more of a focus with the show, but hopefully. Like I said, I'm aware that in order for this show to really catch on, you kind of want to pick a focus. I've been pick one topic and focus on that. That's how you'll develop a following. But I kind of like just talking about whatever and whenever. So that's kind of the direction this show is going to take, and hopefully people enjoy it. All right, get at me with any feedback. It is always appreciated, and I love you all, and I will see you next time. Bye.